You know, some figures in history feel, well, historical, like they're sealed in the past. But Thurgood Marshall? He's not one of them. Today, we're diving into the life and the warnings of a man whose fight for justice and whose final, fiery prophecy from the Supreme Court feels more relevant right now than ever before.
Just let those words sink in for a second. Power, not reason. This is from Thurgood Marshall's very last dissent, delivered just hours before he announced his retirement in 1991. It was an absolutely stunning critique of the institution he'd served for 24 years. Basically a warning shot fired on his way out the door.
So that's the big question, right? How did one man's journey from the segregated South lead to this final explosive moment? To really get it, you have to understand the man and the world that made him.
Marshall's whole way of seeing the world was hammered into shape by the brutal reality of Jim Crow America. For him, the fight wasn't some abstract theoretical exercise. It was personal, deeply personal.
So let's rewind. He was born in 1908 in Baltimore, where segregation was just the absolute law of the land. But a huge turning point came in 1930. He was rejected by his home state's law school, the University of Maryland, for one reason and one reason only, because he was black. Now, instead of being defeated, he went to Howard University and graduated top of his class. That single rejection lit a fire that would, believe it or not, end up changing the entire nation. And at Howard, he found a mentor in the brilliant Charles Hamilton Houston. Now, Houston didn't just teach the law. He taught that the law was a weapon. He told his students, including Marshall, that they needed to be social engineers, that they should use their legal skills not just to win cases, but to fundamentally redesign society and dismantle discrimination.
And in a moment of what you can only call poetic justice, one of Marshall's first huge victories was him representing the NAACP, suing the University of Maryland Law School, the very same school that had slammed the door in his face. And he won. He forced them to admit their first black student. It was such a clear sign of what was to come.
That early victory was just the beginning. It set the stage for his legendary career as the nation's #1 civil rights attorney, where Marshall, the social engineer, started to systematically tear down the entire legal structure of segregation. Get a load of this number. As the lead lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Thurgood Marshall argued 32 cases before the Supreme Court. He won 29 of them. That is an absolutely astounding record that just screams strategic genius.
Now, his most famous win, Brown v. Board of Education, didn't just happen overnight. It was the checkmate in a brilliant multi-decade chess game. Every single case was a deliberate step, chipping away at the legal foundation of separate but equal. First in voting, then in housing, then in graduate schools, until the entire rotten structure was just ready to fall.
You know, during the arguments for Brown, one of the justices actually asked him to define equal. His answer was so simple, so powerful, and just impossible to argue with. He said equal means getting the same thing at the same time and in the same place. That one sentence just cut through all the legal nonsense and exposed the fundamental lie of separate but equal.
So then in 1967, President Lyndon Johnson appoints him to the Supreme Court, making him the very first African-American justice. But his role on the court, well, it was going to change dramatically over the next couple of decades.
As a justice, Marshall was guided by this one core idea he called equal citizenship. For him, the Constitution wasn't just some abstract document. It was a promise that every single person, no matter their background, deserves the dignity of being a full and respected member of American society. This idea was the engine behind every single one of his legal opinions.
When he first joined, he was part of the liberal Warren Court, and he was frequently writing for the majority as it expanded civil rights. But as the court started shifting to the right, Marshall found himself more and more isolated. His powerful voice began moving from the majority opinion to the dissenting opinion.
And from this position in dissent, he became this fierce champion for those he felt were being left behind. He applied his idea of equal citizenship to fight for the poor, for criminal defendants, for women facing discrimination, for people with disabilities, for anyone who he felt was not being treated as a respected, responsible, and participating member of society.
And that brings us right back to where we started, to his final dissent and that really chilling warning about the court he was getting ready to leave behind.
See, his fear was that the new conservative majority cared more about their own ideologies than about the stability of the law itself. He warned that the court was starting to show so little respect for its own precedents.
And precedent is the core legal principle that basically says you should stick with past decisions. He saw them taking a sledgehammer to the foundation.
So, was he right? Well, the numbers kind of suggest he was. Since Marshall retired in 1991, the Supreme Court has overturned more than 26 of its own prior decisions. His warning wasn't just rhetoric, it turned out to be a startlingly accurate prophecy.
And this is the real heart of his warning. He argued that the stability of American law, the whole idea that the rules don't just change on a whim, was now at risk. He believed the rights of the people now depended on nothing more than the personal proclivities, basically the preferences, of whichever 5 people happened to be in the majority.
Which leaves us with a final huge question. Thurgood Marshall's life was a testament to the idea that the law could be a tool for justice and equality. But his final warning was a fear that it could become just another tool for power. So as we look at the challenges we face today, is his vision of equal citizenship, the right of every person to be a full and respected member of society, more urgent now than it has ever been?